Hey guys, welcome back to Tech Adventures with me, Christopher Charlton. Today we're going to be looking at my tool C Rebuilder. It's actually been on Nukepedia for a while, but this version is version 2. It's only going to be available on my Patreon. This is the footage that was interlaced and I deinterlaced it. That tool I believe now is uploaded on Nukepedia. I'll give a link to it on here, and I'll give a link to the YouTube that does a whole big breakdown on how to use it and how it actually is on the inside. I'll be doing more of those kind of breakdowns on my Patreon side of things. This tool is for doing rebuilding areas that yeah, you want to patch out, or you've got some sort of issue and you need to clean it up. So it was initially kind of built as a cleanup tool, and I'll show and explain that a bit more as we go. Alright, so it can be used in two kind of approaches and methods. So this is the tool. C Rebuilder, this is what it looks like. The tool that this is based on is by Richard Fraser. I've modified how it works quite a significant amount. So how this tool works is you can rebuild frames, be it complete frames or partial frames. So we'll have a look at the rebuilding of a full frame first. So I've got my shot, I've got my range. I actually decided to remove this frame specifically. So this could be like in a case scenario where you have a plate that is missing a frame, or you have CG that, you know, the render farm has failed to render one of the frames for X, Y, or Z reason. So what I'm doing on this one is I'm actually just shuffling our image out just on this one frame, just to kind of emulate that. I have done this personally in production, and I will show you the production example in a moment. So this tool has been tested on a few productions now. So when it does it, it tries its best to rebuild the frame. Now, it may cause some artifacting. So the original frame looks like this. That's the actual frame that we're getting rid of, and that's what it's creating. Now, it doesn't do a perfect job, but for a lot of regions it will do a pretty good job, which can most of the time make it seem like there was never a problem. If it is trying to resolve, as in a lot of motion vector kind of tools, if it's trying to resolve something that is too far apart, you will get artifacting. You can change also the motion type to localized, and we'll have a look at what that will achieve for you if you decide to go down that route. Where's my... there we go. So that's it as localized, local. I don't know why they call it local and regularized. Wouldn't it be localized and regularized? Anyway, semantics. I normally, for full frame rebuild, I will use regularized. I would suggest you do the same. You don't have to, but it's entirely up to you. So there's the vector details kind of region. You don't necessarily need to do that. To actually replace one of the frames, all you have to do is go through the tick boxes like so. First off, is it a masked region? In this case, we're doing a full frame, so we want this unticked. We only want this to affect the RGBA, because we don't want it to be calculating other passes. You can have it calculate more if you want, that's entirely up to you. I would recommend not doing this in most case scenarios. So you start by hitting reset, you hit keyframe all, given you want to keyframe all of the frames. You can also just individually go through and tap on the frames as you see fit. So we could add a keyframe here, or we could delete a keyframe here. So I'm going to delete one because we're trying to emulate as if there is no frame here. Well, this is the frame, the spot in the, you know, the timeline where we want to have it overtake and actually rebuild that region. So we don't need to use the add range, delete range. This is more for just the same as doing this, but it's just giving you, you know, save you clicking it in this case 175 times, because that would just be frustrating and time consuming. So yeah, that's what that bit's about, and we'll see that in action in a little bit. And then you just hit rebuild. We'll do the rebuild. So before it, there's the black frame, and then afterwards, so it's taken this frame and this frame, and it's gone in between those and tried to mishmash them together to create a middle frame. So it does a pretty good job. Again, it's all about how much motion there is and if it can kind of understand where something is moving from and to. Now, for the example that I use this in, I actually used this when I was at Rotor Studios. This is from one of their EVBs that is online. This is all CG. There was a frame that was failing to render on the render farm for whatever reasoning, and instead of trying to problem solve and hunt down the reasoning behind that, I didn't have enough time, and there were budget constraints and time constraints. So instead I decided just to use the rebuilder, and I honestly couldn't tell you which frame it happens on. So there is a frame that is being generated by rebuilder in this, and yeah, you can't really tell. I actually had to do it across multiple comps for this specific sequence because we use this one for a few different cars and whatnot. So there's an example of it in use in production, and that's it as just a full frame rebuild tool. So you want to do a patch. So what I've already done is I've done a track, and now this track is what I call a bandpass tracker. We'll just get it to come up. So how bandpass tracker works is we're doing a slight blur because we haven't denoised this image at all. I could, but for all intents and purposes I don't need to at the moment. Sorry, just looking at Rufus. Then I'm doing a blur to kind of be able to do a bandpass and minusing it out, and then I'm multiplying it up by about 50. And it just gives you a lot of detail to be able to track. If you do decide to do something like this, you do need to ensure that in your tracker that you are not clamping super whites and sub-zero footage. That way you can actually track those higher values and lower values. Otherwise it will not do so. So I've just done a very, very, very quick track of 4 points. I'm just using all the transform, rotation and scale of those 4 points. I'm not really putting a huge amount of effort into them. It's not the greatest track ever. Could definitely do better. With that said, I'm using that and I'm creating my stabilized version of it, so we'll have a quick look. We should have a look at what the plate actually does. So the plate is... I'm patching this, just so we know what the task is, I'm patching this over where I walk. So we'll try and reduce this down to a more meaningful range. So somewhere around there and somewhere around there, that'll do. Okay. So it's handheld, hence why I'm tracking it, because I want to be able to rebuild the area. I want it to be a fairly effective kind of job. You can see it bounces around a lot. So there it is. Handheld, I'm walking, you know. So there is a small amount of parallax in this. So when we stabilize it, we'll get a version that looks like... we've got a lens artifact going on. But we're just going to focus on the patch. Now the patch actually has a little bit of parallax going on. There is definitely some motion blur and stuff, which we're not going to heaps focus on in this specific one. We could, but I'm not going to in this one. Now, traditionally how you would approach this is how you'd use your stabilize, your frame hold of your clean plate, and then you do your roto of the area, and maybe you'd feather it a little bit, within a road. I've just got it set to 10 on this one. Shuffle it in. You might have a multiply of the alpha, so you can turn it on and off, and then a match mode back into place, and then pre-mult it and merge it back over. So this is a pretty standardized kind of workflow. Would probably denoise it and deal with grain later, but for the sake of not wasting too much time on this, we're just going to focus on the outcome that we're after. So it doesn't do a terrible job, but it doesn't really look that that great either. So I'll just take this a little bit further, just so we can kind of see how much it works or doesn't work. So if we have a look at this, we can see that it doesn't. It's not terrible, but it's this part at the end is pretty gross. I'm just going to put this into bounce mode at the moment, because I like to, when I'm reviewing stuff, see it forwards and backwards, because you can see issues you normally wouldn't see. So it's not a great patch, because we can see it pop around, and maybe, yeah, we could probably improve, stabilize, but like, this is a pretty simplistic kind of patch. Yeah, you don't really want to stuff around too much time on this. But it's the kind of patch that is fairly common and quite annoying to deal with for what it is. Like, so we want it to be pretty fast and quick. Be it in, you know, film or TVC, it's not producing a great result. So you might try and level up on this. How might you level up? Alright, so you do a frame hold at the beginning and a frame hold at the end. So you've got 2 frames, so that integration wise it can blend better. And you might do some grading. I haven't done grading on this, but you might do it to try and match the colors a bit better, because we noticed at the end of that last one that kind of went a little bit dark as it was transitioning back. This those edges kind of go a bit manky, so you might do a bit of grading here just to try and grade this into match this that little bit better. You could do that with masks and whatnot, but you know, this time consuming doing that, and then doing a blend where you're blending from one and keyframing it, and then you're blending to the other, so that, you know, kind of transitioning between them. So, you know, we've added in these extra steps to try and make this a better outcome. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get the job there. So let's have a quick look at that kind of approach and see the problems that it brings. There's some issues that are quite obvious straight away with blending between the two. So even with like color matching, like we're blending from one to the other, so the colors should blend a little bit. And yes, we could definitely improve the stabilize and try and make it better. There isn't really a reason that this doesn't work, apart from the stabilize is not great enough. But like time frame, we don't want to waste time. The next step you might try to fix this up, apart from fixing up the stabilize, is switching to putting some spline warps to try and fix it up. So you might get some spline warps going, which we'll look at that. You might, you know, transition those from one to the other so that they actually fall into a similar position. I'm just using pins on this one, and I'm inverting it. And you might keep these separate so you can do your blend down here. But again, that can work. Like there's no reason why this couldn't work, but it's very consuming. Like we're now doing an extra frame hold, 2 extra grades potentially. We're doing 2 spline warps, which is very time consuming kind of stuff. We're doing a blend on top. So there's a few, you know, levels of detail that we're going into, and it's still, and then we've also got our multiply down here. So we've got to animate a lot of things just for what would be a very simplistic patch. It's not that you can't do it this way, it's just it's very time consuming. Why this is occurring and why this is so problematic is because there is also something else we're not talking about that is going on in this shot, which is there is a very small amount of parallax going on in that. Even though it's all on the same plane, you know, this is protruding out off the wall clearly, and it's giving a different edge as it moves. Plus, we get, you know, slightly different lighting conditions as we move through the time, so there are good reasons for why it's not coming out as simplistic as we might have thought. Alright, so this is where my tool kind of kicks in, and it has a few niceties, and we'll have a look at it. So first off, I would recommend you do the same process. You stabilize it. It doesn't have to be a great stabilizer, but the better stabilized it is, the better result you will get. Still do your roto shape. We're using the exact same stabilizer, exact same roto shapes, exact same road. And then how we do it is we reset it all, so as if it's blank, keyframe it all, and then we're going to delete the frames that we don't want to see. So at the moment what we don't want is the frames where I'm walking in front, so we want to go back to where I'm not in front, which is why I've already pre-selected 1076. So there I am. I'm not in front of it at that point. You might want to go further back, but you know. And then 1108. Ugh, having trouble with numbers today. Which is nice and clean, that one. And so you can see like that. All the ones in between there, we're going to just say dirty, and I'm walking over the top of them, so we don't want that. So delete range, and then we hit rebuild. And if we now look at our shot, we will see that it actually does a little bit of rebuilding. Plus it's doing something that we haven't talked about on here. Now we're using the mask input because we are using a mask, and there's a reason why I'm using a mask as well, because there's some tricks we can do with this which I will show as we go a bit further on, because there is one more example after this I want to show the tool on. These frames here are the reason why they're blanking out is because it automatically does, when you're using the mask, it's automatically setting up its own little multiplier. So if it's not one of the replacement frames in a replacement region, it just turns it off. So you don't have to worry about animating that. It's also doing a bounding box based on the roto shapes bounding box. So also when you look in it, it actually allows you to see, and now this is better than you might realize, it allows you to actually see the roto shape in the correct location of where the road shape should be. That was actually a surprising technical challenge, trying to figure out where and how to get rid of some bugs in Nuke that yeah, I wasn't aware of until I kind of stumbled into them. So there's that, and we'll have a look at it. Yeah, now that, so it's using the same stabilize, same motion, match moves, same roto. Let's have a look at it and see how well it does in comparison to the other techniques. And you know, it took click, click, set, delete, rebuild. That's it. There was a job. Those are the steps. So now it's not going to be the greatest, as in positional, because there is additional jumping and jittering going on. As I said, the stabilize is not the greatest I've ever done, but you can see it's pretty passable. You could totally get away with that. Get away with that probably in film as well, with maybe a few more steps like this lens artifact that is disappearing as it goes over. We would probably want to bring that back. And yeah, obviously you'd continue on down. So it's pretty quick, and it does a lot of tricks for you, and it renders very fast too. Compared to this kind of approach, this will be quite slow to render. This is actually quite fast because it's doing your bounding boxes, and it's also turning on and off when it's there and when it's not. So it actually becomes pretty light to use, which is really nice. So that was this technique. Was used not in with this exact version of the tool. It was actually done with the early version that's on Nukepedia for free. It was used in First They Kill My Father. Now I will quickly show off that. So in this shot, the girl actually had a rope attached to her. It's quite a long shot in the story. She had a rope attached to her harness just to ensure that she was safe, because, you know, child leaning over balcony, OH&S kind of side of things, just trying to make sure that they're kept safe whilst they're doing their job. So how this was used was I did 2 corner pins. I think it was like this bit, which kind of went down to here more so. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then another one over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, or something like that. And I used one of my other tools, temporal median chain, which I'm going to release a newer version of that and do a full breakdown of how that actually works, an explanation of all that info, and that's going to be up on my Patreon. There is a version of that tool that exists at the moment that is free, that is on Nukepedia, so you are welcome to grab that. I think it's called C Locomotive Temporal Median Stack or Chain. Can't remember if I went with stack or if I went with chain. Terrible naming convention, but yeah, I'll improve that as well with the tool, just so it's a little bit easier to find and makes a bit more sense. So I use that tool to do a little bit of primitive cleanup for me, so I didn't have to do heaps of cleanup. But then yeah, I use this tool to pretty much rebuild all the other frames. And the reason why this is a very useful tool is because of the amount of parallax. Like this shot, traditionally, you would have done this in a few different ways. You could have done like one big patch for the background and one big patch for the foreground, and then rotoed between them, just because there's enough parallax in this shot. It's very subtle, but it's enough that you would have to individualize the approach. It's the same with the, or you could just do it as a whole bunch of small patches, which is even more time consuming and tedious. I don't think anyone has time for that. So to get a concept of how much parallax there is, here's a really good point right here. So this little bit of white that sticks out, by the time you're up here, it can no longer be seen. That's kind of the level of parallax is very subtle, but in film you will have problems around that. It needs to look good enough that people can't see it at all. Like that's the job. Initially, the reason I came up with this tool was because of a case scenario. I believe they wanted to patch out a building, and the discussed approach was to rebuild the city, to kind of patch back in with CG the actual area behind the building that they were removing. I thought it was an interesting discussion because I'd previously tried to do something very similar with this exact shot. So this shot is from Mitch Martinez. I'm going to say that wrong. I always do. It's from his aerial sets. To it's this one here, aerial footage of Philadelphia. I actually did ask him about using his footage, so I am aware, and he's aware that I'm using it. And thanks for that, by the way. But you'll notice I used a lot of his stuff in one of my earliest show reels, like the first one after I finished my training at Animal Logic. In that first demo reel, I really wanted to do this shot and actually clean up this tower and make it remove it, well, just clean it up and remove it entirely. And I never really had the chops to do it back then, and it always bugged me. But it's an incredibly challenging shot. Like, that was why I picked it. But it was a little bit over eager of me, I think. So, as you can see, there is quite a lot of parallax from start to finish. You see, but it's about 15 degrees of parallax, which is quite a significant amount of parallax. Not something to kind of sneer at when you're doing cleanup work. Now, this shot is challenging on a few fronts. Like, just camera tracking this can be problematic because, like, your main central point of the shot is being consumed by an object that is reflecting light all over the place. So you can't really utilize this that well. You can use it, but it's just not brilliant. So trying to get even just a good camera track out of it is a challenge. Plus you've got so much blue sky, got things in great, far away distant plane. It is a little bit of an oddly challenging shot. Well, it was for me anyway when I was younger. Not so challenging these days, but so I had a crack at it after I finished up at Allura, because I heard them talking about we need to clean this up, and I thought it was kind of ridiculous doing a 3D approach. It doesn't mean you can't do it, it's totally viable, but it seems very expensive and time consuming. So I actually gave it a go, and this is I'll just bring it up and try and make it a bit bigger. So this is the attempt that I started to go down. I never actually fully completed this script, but just kind of give you an idea of the size of the script. I started trying to patch it out, and this is actually when I kind of started working on Richard's tool and building it into my own one. Now, that was using a much primitive version of it, and there's a lot of little things that are in there to try and hack it around and kind of make it work in ways it was never intended to work. But in saying that, that is kind of like the background of where this tool came from and why it's come to existence. So now let's see it in context to this actual shot. So I've done a very primitive track. Again, it's just a 1-point track. Haven't done anything more than that. In this, I am trying to track one particular item. We're only going to clean up one of these, and we're only. So again, I'm not denoising this. I could, and probably should. I'm not, moving lens distortion and integrating it back in. I'm not doing any of that stuff on film. You probably would, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're not going into those exact specifics. So you can see it comes out on the other side, and then it goes well and truly behind, and there's quite a lot of parallax. So we will be able to see that a bit clearer in a moment. So now let's have a look at it stabilized. I did a stabilization of it, and let's put it down here. So in our first point, it is there, and that's the level of parallax that we're dealing with, which is quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to try and recreate this side edge with this tool in this example. You can do it for edges, but you need some data there, and as you can see, even though we're on frame 0, there isn't an edge there that we can actually really give it to mush around to try and make it work. So in this case scenario, I am just going to grab that region. So there's this roto, which is the tighter roto around the object, which has got how many keyframes? Two keyframes. And we have this roto, which has 1. So not a lot of effort on that front. And it just sticks on to where it is. I think I did the roto on this to be on 1 frame, and then 200, I think. There it is. There's the other frame. So in between those, it's just interpolating. It's not really rotoing anything because there's nothing really there. So I've got this, which is an additional little stabilizer that I'm doing, and I'm linking all these values down to here and then inverting it. So whatever additional stabilization I do on top of it, it's inverted after the fact, so I can kind of match move it into position. So I'm doing this because as it's going behind, we're not getting enough data as to where its kind of location should be. I've only done a few keyframes of this. If we look at the dope sheet, there's a few, but there's not heaps, so it's again not a huge amount of work. This part is very manual. You don't have to do it this way. If you've got a good track to start with, then it's not a problem. But then again, that's kind of a big part of this. So I'm then using the mask, which I'm shuffling in up here, which is that, tighter roto. I'm using that down here and pre-molting our RGBA by it. So in our tool, it is just, we're using the mask, we reset, keyframe all, we're using the range, so we're actually not inside of that, might widen that range a bit. So we're deleting from 1 to 175, so 0 will be in existence, because that's our first frame, we kind of need that one. You can't leave it where there is no frame, because it doesn't have data to go to. So we do that, and then we hit rebuild. Get rid of that. So now it has should have done our patch for us. So here it is, doing the interpolation of the patch from one to the other. Now it's, as I said previously, it's automatically turning itself off because it doesn't need to be on that frame. It's only the frames that we're deleting that it needs to be on. So it will interpolate all the rest of that region, and as you can see, it's quite fast because it's doing the bounding box, and yeah, it is slowly morphing this around to match with those small parallax movements. And we don't have to worry about grading or lighting changes because it's kind of handling that, because it's a very soft transition. Now we could have this so it's, transitioning from multiple frames. So you could have it where you have one clean frame, another clean frame, and another clean frame, and let it just transition between those. So you can actually get it to do quite a lot for you. So then we are using our mask to pre-multiply it. So that way we actually get a nice patch that goes all the way through. And there's the actual tool. So I could probably go through and do a whole bunch of patches and solve this pretty quickly now, and pretty cleanly, lightly. It still would require a number of patches. You don't want to do too many patches. As you can see, I'll just stop this. This thing down here is moving too great for it to actually recognize as the same item, so it's kind of morphing it into the wrong position. So you want to make sure that like the areas that you're patching at least are stabilized to a point where it looks like that part could potentially be in the same position. It'll just make the transitions so much easier. So that's why I'm kind of calling that alpha up early. But the reason why I'm also using a much bigger box is so that it has more data to be able to utilize to stabilize the morph. So that is the tool rebuilder. I've used it on many projects. There's the two that I've given example of, and it's been going for a while. But if you want to get hold of this tool, you can find it on my Patreon. So this is my Patreon as well, just to spruik it all the way. So it's under Chris Sheldon Tech Adventures. Yep. So there's the pricing and what you get for each one. If you do go into the top tier, which is $25, you get to choose what kind of tools I'm building and how you want them to function. So that is, you know, pretty cool kind of ability. Have your own personal TD, and that works outside of the constraints of your company. So you can keep the tool whenever you leave, and you can take it to wherever you want.